Come for the bread, stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let Them Eat Bread. Today on Let Them Eat Bread, we are going back to my classic challah recipe, which means we need to do all the things that we usually do for our classic challah recipe. Today, I'm also going to be employing a standing mixer to knead our dough. I will be telling you how to do this even if you don't have a standing mixer, so don't worry about that. But first, we need to start with our yeast mixture. So I have about 6 ounces of water here, about 110 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer to figure out how hot yours is, the best way to do this is to take your pinky and to dip it in the water. Obviously, make sure it's clean. If it feels warm enough that you would want to take a bath or a shower in it, that's about 110 degrees. Not hot like you're in a sauna, but just warm enough to take a bath in. So we're going to add to that our sugar and our yeast. So I have a tablespoon of sugar here mixed in with just less than a tablespoon of yeast. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to lightly shake this over. So the warmth of the water is to bring the yeast kind of back to life. The yeast is dehydrated. And we're going to take our fork. Oh, so the sugar is to feed the yeast. And we're going to take our fork and we're going to use a rounding motion like this and just lightly fluff our yeast and our sugar so it begins to dissolve. The yeast will not dissolve, but the sugar should. So you should see a little cloudy mixture like you can see here with mine. And we're going to cover that and set a timer for 10 minutes. The yeast blooming, oh, and remember to cover it. The yeast blooming can take anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, but because we're adding sugar, the yeast should bloom a little faster. If you're not using sugar for whatever reason, your yeast may take a little longer to bloom, but that's okay. The purpose of blooming the yeast is twofold. One, to wake it back up from its slumber and essentially tell it, hey, time to get to work. And also to check to make sure that the yeast you have is still good. If the yeast you have is not still good, then after 5 to 10 minutes, you won't see any reaction with it, in which case you'll need to start over with fresh yeast. In a separate bowl, we're taking an additional 6 ounces of water. Now, this has been warmed to about 100 degrees. Keep in mind that it doesn't actually need to be this warm. The reason I do this with my challah recipe is because I'm usually taking my fresh water right out of the refrigerator, and adding it cold can sometimes be detrimental to the process and to warming the dough. So what I like to do instead is I like to warm my water to about 100 degrees and allow it to come down to room temperature. It doesn't need to be warm. So to that, we're going to add our eggs. So our eggs are going to be 2 whole large eggs and 1 large egg yolk. Let's give that a quick whisk here. Move that a little closer to me. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to add to this mixture is we're going to add 7 tablespoons of canola oil. Okay, just give that a quick whisking. So this mixture here is where a good chunk of our liquid for the bread is going to come from. So it's important to have these ratios pretty close to right. Now, the nice thing about most bread recipes is that if for some reason you don't get the ratios right the first time, most bread recipes are pretty forgiving. You're going to be able to kind of play around a little bit with the bread recipe and add a little water if you need it, a little bit of flour if you need it. So don't worry too much about that. The next thing we're going to add, because I like to make my challah a sweet challah, is we're going to add 7 tablespoons of honey. Now you can use any honey. I'm using store-bought wildflower honey. So we're just going to get this in. This is where all of our sweetness is going to come from, by the way. If you want to make this recipe with sugar, just remember, instead of honey, just remember you need to find another way to get the liquid measure in, because the honey is not just adding sweetness in a very concentrated way. It's also adding a little bit of liquid to our liquid mixture here. Whereas if you use sugar, it's going to be more akin to a dry ingredient like flour or salt or something. and will take away from your bread. So you'll just need to find a different way to get that liquid in there, whether you add more water or more oil. It just kind of depends on what you want it to do. Okay. All right, so we're going to mix this, being careful not to get it all over the place. So while you're doing this, you should also be checking your yeast mixture. You can see ours right here. But if you have yours sat somewhere else, typically I put mine to the side, but I thought I'd show you all today just so you could actually watch it bloom. So once this is all mixed, we should have a couple minutes left on our timer. Let's take a look. Okay, so it's been about 4 or 5 minutes. And by the way, sometimes that's all you're going to need. So don't worry about it if for some reason your yeast blooms a lot faster than mine or your yeast blooms a lot slower than mine. The key, as well as patience with this bread, is just to make sure that all the ingredients do what they're supposed to. All right, so we finished mixing this. You can see now that I have a nice mixture of my eggs, of my second set of water, my oil, and my honey. And this is going to be the primary base, the primary liquid base for our bread, other than, of course, the yeast mixture that we've got going here. Okay. Now we need to prepare our dry ingredients. As I said, I'm going to be using a standing mixer, so I'm going to take the standing mixer bowl and start to prepare my ingredients in here. Excuse me. So first I have our flour. We have about 6 cups of flour here, so we're just going to put this in here. You don't need to sift this flour. You don't need to do anything special with this flour. Just measure it out and put it in. Now, if you're doing this in a bowl as opposed to a standing mixer, you don't need to pour the flour into another mixture. What you can do is you can just take your hand and start to move the flour to the edge of the bowl to create a little well, inside which is going to go our liquids. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to allow the standing mixer actually to create the well for us with the dough hook. So now that we've done that, we're going to add our salt. I tend to use about a tablespoon of salt, but it really depends on how salty you want it to be. Salt's really there just to reinforce the flavor, so really not putting that much in. But it's completely up to you. If you don't like salt or you don't want salt in it, you're welcome to not use any salt at all. I would recommend just a tiny bit of salt, though. So if you aren't a fan of salt or you're worried that the salt is going to fundamentally change the sweetness of your bread, I would still put in a little pinch. I'm using kosher salt, so it's a nice pinch if you want to use kosher salt. But regular table salt or any other salt is fine. At the end of the day, the salt's going to get worked into the dough and more or less not be independent of the other ingredients. So you don't have to worry too much about what kind of salt you're using. But I find that a tablespoon of salt is really a great amount of salt for this recipe. So let's put this on our standing mixer real quick and give it 30 seconds to create that little well. Now, when you're mixing this, you're going to do it on the lowest setting on the standing mixer. If you have a spatula or a whisk or something, you can use that to mix together your flour and your salt. Again, at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that there's a little cup, a little well in the middle of your dry ingredients mixture in order for you to place your liquids in. And the reason you do this, most importantly of all, is so that you're allowing it to kind of start to mix in even before you start mixing it. Additionally, if you don't put your liquids in a well, what's going to happen is the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients are going to sit on top of each other. And although they're definitely not going to mix, the other problem is once you start mixing, it's going to slosh around everywhere. You're going to make a big mess. So you're putting the well in your dry ingredients for a number of reasons. One more thing unrelated to this. If we are making my classic challah recipe this week, and But if there's a recipe that you want to see made on the show, send us a message at our Facebook page, Let Them Eat Bread, facebook.com/LetThemEatBreadShow, a link to which you can find in the description below. You can also find our YouTube page in the description below for all of our episodes. This week, we will be cutting up this episode as well as all the previous episodes and releasing them. I'm going to schedule them to release so that if you want, you'll see the episodes come out in order in the order that they should be, to make sure that the newest episodes are near the top and the oldest episodes are near the bottom. But that way, if you just want to watch politics episodes, you can. If you just want to watch bread making episodes, you can. Or if you want to watch the entire episode, you're welcome to do that too. But they're all going to be in separate playlists on the channel, so you can see more or less the content that you want to see. And we'll be doing that from now on. So hopefully what will happen in the future is you'll have one long episode like we're doing now on the stream every week. And then a day or two after that, probably Monday, you'll see however many clips come from that week's episode. So hopefully you'll be able to either see the whole show or watch whatever content you want just on the Monday when you're getting ready for whatever it is you're doing for the week. All right, so our timer is about to go off, so let's just take a quick look at our well here, and then we'll examine our yeast mixture. So it's going to be hard to show because the flour is going to move a lot, but there is a well here. There's a pretty significant well here. The dough hook has essentially created a little wall of dry ingredients that our wet ingredients are going to go in. So we're going to bring this back here for the initial mixing. Let's take a look at the yeast mixture. All right, so you can see here in the yeast mixture that we've got essentially, I'm just going to cover this real quick. You can see this kind of foamy, bubbly layer on top. This means our yeast is alive and well. So we are ready to get moving. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pour in our yeast mixture, making sure that all of the foam and goodness is in there. Okay. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pour in our egg, oil, and honey mixture. Okay. So now, I don't know if you can see this. No, it's going to be hard for you to see this. But anyway, so the liquid's actually sitting in the nice little well that we've created. So that's going to be really easy to mix around. So I'm going to put this on the stand mixer, and I'll talk a little bit about how to do this if you don't have one. So because we're just barely mixing our ingredients together, we're going to start on the lowest speed. We will turn the speed up. We will turn the speed up as soon as we get a rough, shaggy ball together. Now, there are two other ways you can do this if you're not using a standing mixer. The first way is in the bowl, right? Like I showed you with the red bowl, if you've created your little well and you've put your liquid ingredients in there, you want to take your spatula. You don't want to use a whisk at this point. The bread will just get caught up in there. So you want to take a flat surface, either a wooden spoon or a spatula, and you want to start folding in your ingredients. So the way you do this, if you're not familiar with the folding technique, is you're going to take, I'll just show you. So you're going to take this and you're going to scoop underneath and then fold back on top and then push back on top. So every time that you go, you're just going to keep that circular motion, and you're going to want to turn the bowl so that you're folding different portions of the ingredients every single time. And you're going to keep doing that until a rough ball of dough comes together, and then you're going to really start the kneading process. If you're doing this on a board with the well method, first of all, props to you. It's a very difficult thing to do. I demoed it on the first week of the show, and by some miracle, it did not completely go everywhere. But it's really important. It's really important to be cognizant of where your walls are to make sure that your ingredients don't leak out. But the same thing's essentially going to happen. You're going to take your hands, your spatula, your bread whisk, and you're going to start lightly flicking in some of your dry ingredients into your wet ingredients, And by using 2 clean fingers, you're just going to go around the well and start to incorporate the walls of the well to make sure that all of your ingredients start to come together. And as you get and as a rough dough starts to form, you can start moving in more ingredients, and you can start the process of actually letting the dough come together. Once you've got your rough dough together, you're going to take it out of whatever vessel you're going to be using. You can either keep it on your board if you're using a board, or take it out of your bowl, and you're going to start the kneading process. This week, actually, my arms are actually kind of sore. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to allow the standing mixer to do the kneading for me. So I'm going to sit back and watch that and talk a little bit from there. But if you're not using a standing mixer, or you're only using a standing mixer to combine your ingredients, you want to make sure that you have lightly floured your work surface, or continue to lightly flour your work surface to make sure that your dough isn't sticking as you're kneading. So I'm going to take a look at my dough, because it sounds like we've got a rough dough form, and we'll move on from there. So you can see that I've got a bit of a dough coming together. Now this is ready to be kneaded. So if your dough looks a bit like this, or even if it doesn't look as put together as this, you're going to start to flour your board and do some kneading. As I said, I'm a little sore this week, unfortunately, so I am not going to be doing my kneading by hand. I'm going to allow the machine to do it. So if you're doing that, just make sure you push down your bread so that the dough hook can get a handle on all of it and start moving it around. And you're going to allow it to knead for about 10 minutes. If you're using the machine, you want to be watching it the whole time and speeding up and slowing down as necessary. I'm going to have mine on the number 2 setting, which is just above stir. Depending on what brand of standing mixer you have, you may need to use a different, you may need to figure out what speed is appropriate for you. But essentially, you want the standing mixer to be moving it around, pulling the strands of the bread, and generally speaking, creating more gluten development. So let's put those on here, and we'll talk a little bit more about kneading if you're doing this on a board, which most of you are probably doing right now. All right, we're going to get the rest of our dough off of here. And don't worry that I'm doing a lot of this with my hands. This bread is getting baked. My hands are also clean. Your hands should be too, hopefully. We take hygiene very seriously, not just because it's a pandemic, because bread making is literally a hands-on process. So you want to make sure that you are using as clean hands as you possibly can. So if you're kneading this by hand, at this point, you're going to want to take your palm, specifically the bottom portion of your hand here, and you want to push your dough out, and then use your fingers to grab the bit you just pushed and fold it back over. At that point, you want to rotate your dough about 90 degrees or a quarter turn and do the same thing, back and forth over and over again. If it becomes too difficult to do with one hand, that's fine. You can use the 2-hand method. Essentially, it's the same basic thing, but you're doing it with 2 hands. So with one hand, you're going to hold your dough mainly with your palm, and with the second hand, you're going to push your palm, use your palm to push the bread out, and then scoop it back, rotating again. So you're going to want to do this for 10 minutes, and you want the dough to come together in such a way that it's tacky but not sticky, and that when you hold it up to a light source, nice and stretched, it performs the window pane test. You can see the light coming through it. Another thing you need to be careful of is scraping down your work surface. So for me, because I'm using a standing mixer, what's going to happen is the bread will sometimes stick to the side of the standing mixer bowl. If you're working on a board, there's a chance that your dough starts to stick to certain parts of it, right? You want to just make sure that you're getting in there and getting that up as much as possible, or using a spatula to scrape down the sides if you can. This is to make sure that you get as much bread dough into your bread dough ball as possible, but also to make sure that you're just keeping your work surfaces clean and that everything's getting kneaded appropriately. Another thing to make sure of if you're using a standing mixer is to make sure that that different parts of the bread are getting kneaded at different times. If your standing mixer is stuck on a loop, just kneading one particular part, you're going to want to stop your standing mixer, and you're going to want to take that up and shuffle around your bread. Just put it down here a little bit. Allow the dough hook to get different parts of the bread. This is to make sure that every part of the bread is being kneaded evenly. I have now turned my standing mixer up to 4, which is the second setting after stir. This is going to allow for the bread to move a little quicker and for the pull to happen a little faster. If for some reason that isn't working, or your standing mixer sounds like it's having a hard time, just slow it back down again. But what should start to happen now is that the bread should start to go around fairly quickly in the standing mixer, and parts of the bread should tear off. And you should start to, at some point, hear a slapping sound of the bread hitting the side of the bowl. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to happen. You can have different parts of the bread come off of the main dough ball and be kneaded separately. It's the same basic concept. The bread is separating and it's reconnecting, stretching itself out in order to develop more gluten. So just keep your eye on that. And remember, if you're kneading by hand, you just want to keep that process up. You will begin to feel the bread get less sticky and more tacky, and it may still stick to your board, which means you want to constantly reflour your board with just a tiny little bit. You probably want to put down no more than about a tablespoon at a time. Now, I just slowed down my standing mixer. It was making a hard mechanical sound. So if your standing mixer starts to do that, it's a sign that it's going too fast and that it's not able to work the bread that quickly. So you want to slow it down to be more in tune with the bread. It will still knead perfectly well, so you don't have to worry about that. Once you get to a point where you think your bread is going to be ready, what you're going to do is you're going to take your bread and you're going to use your hands to shuffle it into a ball. So you're going to take your dough ball here, and you're going to use your hands moving in a circular motion, making sure that your pinkies are more or less underneath it, but not so much that it raises off the surface, and move it around until the top of it starts to become a nice taut ball. Once you do that, you're going to take your hands in an L formation, press down, take a little bit that pops up here, twist it off, and then start to stretch it out with your thumb and fingers until it is thin enough that you can raise it up and you see light coming through it. If you cannot do that with your bread just yet, or you can't do with your bread such that it tears before you're able to get it as thin as you need it, then you need to knead a little bit more. So this has been going for a few minutes now. You can see that this is not sticky at all. I can put my hand on it. I can transfer it between my hands, and it's nice, the right shape. So what we're going to do now, just to check this, is we're going to try and make it into a nice taut ball. You can see that I'm not really putting in much effort here. I'm just using my hands, cupping them like this around the ball, and just moving it round and round. Now the ball's still a little tacky on the bottom, so it's going to hold onto your board. All right, so we've got a nice taut ball here. So we're going to take this little piece here. We're going to squeeze, twist that off. All right, so now we've got a little ball of dough. I have actually a feeling that this is not going to be ready, but what we're going to do is we're going to use our thumb and fingers to stretch this out very slowly. Yes, it's feeling a little tight, so my guess is this is not done yet, but that's okay. We're going to try it. We're going to see, and you're going to keep stretching and keep stretching little by little until it feels very, very thin. Okay. Yeah, I don't think this is going to be it. So we're getting there. Oh, actually, maybe. So you'll have to tell me. Can you see me through this? Let's see if we can. Let's put it up to the light. So actually, oh, look at that. We actually can see light coming through it, and it's not tearing. So do you see that little part at the top there? Where it's much lighter, you can see the light on the other side. That means that our bread is done kneading. Excuse me. So we are going to go back real quick and just put this back into a ball. Now, if your bread is not done yet, don't feel like you have to rush because of me. You have a lot of time, and there's no rush on this. Bread is a process. It's not a rush. All right, so our bread is nice and taut. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to prepare it for rising. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to lightly oil a bowl. And we're going to take our bread and put it right in that bowl. As I say on the show every week, I am using a glass bowl. So it is going to take a little bit of warming up. Glass, typically, it is harder to warm up a glass bowl. It doesn't come to room temperature. It stays a little bit cooler than the temperature of the room. So we're just going to run a little bit of warm water over the bottom of our glass bowl, just enough so the bowl no longer feels cold to the touch. Once it's about room temperature or a little bit warm, we're going to put a little bit of oil in it, move it around in there, and then start the rising process. Yeah, this is going to need a little bit. If you are using a plastic bowl or a bowl that already feels like it's room temperature and is not cool to the touch like this glass bowl is, you don't need to worry about this process. Just take about a teaspoon of oil and start to use your hands to rub it about and create a thin layer, making sure that there's a tiny bit extra in the bottom of your bowl here so that you can rub it all over your bread. Give me 1 second. All right, so I have warmed this bowl by running warm water over the outside of it. It no longer feels cold to the touch, which is perfect. You just want to use a paper towel and make sure that all the moisture is gone. The only moisture we really want in here is oil, so just get the water off. And again, I'm using a paper towel because it's most convenient for me. If you have a regular towel or you want to use your bread towel for this, you should do that. We're trying not to waste as much as possible here. Okay, so we're going to take our oil. I'm going to free for this, but if you want to measure it, about a teaspoon should do. A tablespoon if you're feeling like you have a very big bowl. Okay, we're just going to take this and we're going to move it around in our bowl here. Just let this kind of go around the sides. And obviously it's not going to do that on its own. So, well, it's not going to do all of it on its own. So you just take your hand and very lightly coat the bowl with your oil. All right, and you might be able to see, probably not, but we have a little bit of excess oil in the bottom of our bowl here. That is perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap, very rude. We're going to roll our little dough ball in this excess oil so that it can rise. So let's take our dough ball back, plop it in here, give it a little bit of a spin, move it around the bowl. And we're going to turn it over and get some oil on it. We're just going to rub it down with the oil. And actually, I think I put about a teaspoon in here, and that might have been too much. So it's really up to you to decide what you think is appropriate. Okay. Looks like I spilled a little bit of oil as well, so let's clean that up. All right, so now we are going to cover this with plastic wrap to keep the heat in, to keep anything from getting into it. And we're going to cover it with a towel in order to keep that heat in. We do this so that the bread stays nice and warm as it rises, and so that the rise is very efficient. I'm using plastic wrap, but if you don't want to use plastic wrap, you just want to use a dedicated towel, you're welcome to do that. The one thing I will say, though, is do not use a lid if you can help it. So the reason I say that is because if you use a lid and you essentially create a seal with that lid where there's no way for the air to escape, halfway through your rising process, your lid may pop off. Because remember, what's happening inside the bread as it grows is that the yeast is eating all the sugars and from the flour and from the honey, and it is creating carbon dioxide, which is creating air in the bread, which is allowing it to rise. All right, we are going to let this sit on the counter for an hour, and then we are going to talk some politics. So I will be right back. Set your timer for 1 hour. All right, and this has definitely more than doubled in size. Look at that, beautiful. So now what we're going to do is we are going to weigh out our dough. Well, actually, we're going to put a little bit of flour down, just a teeny tiny bit. I actually have a tiny bit of flour on here, but really we're going to put the tiniest bit of flour on this board to allow us. That might even be too much. To allow us to roll out our bread and to weigh it out. Because we don't waste here, we're going to take our plastic wrap and put it on our scale. I like to weigh mine in ounces. You can weigh yours in whatever you like. We're going to weigh out. This recipe technically makes 1 loaf, but if you want, you can make it into 2. Okay. All right, so real quick, we're just gonna get this back into a ball before we cut it up. And you want to try and get out some of these air bubbles, if you can. Just because it's going to be difficult for it to rise, for it to be formed up otherwise. But just get your dough back into more or less a ball. Don't worry about how it looks, because the truth is we are going to, we're going to cut it up later. But just try and get it more or less into a ball. However you want to do that is fine. Just going to roll this up here. There we go. It's going to get cut anyway, so I don't really care what it looks like. I'm going to shape it and roll it. So, all right, so this weighs 55.66 ounces. So, math is hard. So let's do a 3 braided challah this week. We'll say it's going to be close to 54. 54 divided by 3 is math. 17, I think. Yeah. All right. So we're going to try and get 3. Uh, 18. Sorry, 18. 18. Okay. So let's see how much this weighs. 21. It's a little too much. Okay. Okay, that's closer to 18. So you're going to need to be a little bit more than 18. Okay, so let's get this one to like 18 and change. Okay. That one's fine. That one weighed about 1810, by the way, just in case you're wondering. All right, and then this one is 17 and change. Let's get it to 18 and change. Okay. So this is 1905. These don't have to be exactly even. But, the more even they are, the easier it will be a little later. Okay. 18.52. And then just to check my math real quick, 18.62. Okay, great. We are pretty much the exact same for all of them. So what we're going to do now, we're going to just make these into little balls. Just enough so they sit on the side here before we form them into logs. And we're just going to use a couple quick kneads for that. Just get them into a ball shape. Again, doesn't need to be pretty because we're going to make them into logs. And you're just trying to make sure that any excess dough that you've put on these is all mixed together. Okay. This one formed up into a better ball. So let's make this one into a strand first. So using the little bit of flour we have on here, we're going to take this ball, let's move this to the side so you can see, and I take my hand, just roll it back until a nice little log forms. I'm going to do two hands. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on this, by the way, and the reason I'm doing that is so that it all comes together. All right, so now that we've got more or less a log shape, we're just going to roll back and forth, or you can just keep rolling in one direction, whatever makes you feel better. We're trying to get this log to be pretty long. Actually, I can put this away and bring out my tray, because this is where we're going to have our bread when it is ready. Actually, these two are done too, so you can put them in the sink. All right, so you can see here, I'm just going back and forth, and I'm rolling from the thickest parts and moving to the thinnest parts. You pretty much want your logs to be even the whole way down, with the exception of you want the ends to be a little tapered, which will make your braiding easier. And then this will rise again. Oh, and while I'm here, and it's not really a political thing, but today is International Workers' Day, the original Labor Day. The reason that in the States we don't celebrate this as Labor Day is as a hope to reduce worker solidarity, which is why we have our own Labor Day. It's not really based on anything. There is a reason why they picked that day. I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But the rest of the world celebrates their Workers' Day today. And today is International Workers' Day. So as we say on International Workers' Day, on May Day, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. And if I remember correctly, I believe that's the last line of Marxist Communist Manifesto. Well, and Engels. I always leave out poor Engels. Engels did the work. Not all of it, but Engels put in some good work. So we should honor Engels at least as much as we honor Marx. I always forget poor Engels. Sorry, Engels. I don't know why I looked up. I don't know what Engels is doing right now. All right, so we got our first log here, nice and long. You can see that in some places it's not exactly even. Don't worry about that. You may end up stretching a little later. All right, we're going to put a little bit more flour down. So your board should have a little tiny bit of oil on it, probably just from dealing with the dough that had oil on it. It's fine, it'll hold the flour, don't worry about it. Oh, this one's gonna be a little harder to do. That's all right. We're just gonna keep rolling. Try to reduce the content, the length of these videos by prepping the ingredients ahead of time, but it looks like we may actually get pretty close to where we usually do at about 2 hours. So I am trying, people. But that's what we have the clips for. So you'll be able to see exactly what you want to see without all of my commentary if you don't want that. And if you don't want to make bread and you just want to see commentary, you can see that too. Hopefully there are no issues with this episode. Last week, we had an issue where the sound was very soft. I did some tests with the microphone. Hopefully that's resolved. It's a little dry. And hopefully you can see me. Because that was an issue 2 weeks ago where it just didn't play. I was here, I was making bread for 2 hours, and lo and behold, there was no video afterwards. And apparently there was no video during either. So hopefully we've worked out all the kinks of this system. Hard to say though. All right, so you can make as many strands as you want. I'm just making 3. And they don't have to be particularly pretty. Just try and make sure they're the same length. That's really the kicker. You really want them to just be the same length. So whatever you can do to make them a similar length, just roll them out, stretch them out. You want to do that. All right, so these two are about the same length. This one's shrinking a little bit, but it's all right. We'll stretch it a tiny bit when we go to braid. All right, so the last one here. Fortunately, this is not something that I can do before you get here, because this is all, we're doing this together. I'm doing this live. And the hope is, by the way, that we will do this together, that you will watch with me. Sorry. You will watch as I do this, and maybe you'll make your bread as I'm making mine. This is to give you as much of an instructional guide as possible to do this. That's why I do this live. But also, more importantly, so that you can see my mistakes, so that you can see, any issues that we have, and we'll problem solve together too, right? That way, we can all get better at making bread. Even though I've been making bread for 6 or 7 years now, I'm definitely not the expert. And bread is a difficult thing. So, if for some reason your bread is not always the way you want it, don't worry about it. There are lots of, practice makes perfect. But also, sometimes the bread is different each time. Even if you think you're using the same amount of ingredients or the same ratios or what have you, sometimes the bread is just different. It behaves differently. Maybe it's more humid one day and you get some extra moisture in your bread, or it's drier and cooler one day and it doesn't rise as much. There are lots of reasons that your bread will look and act different on different days. So don't sweat it. All right, we are more or less ready now to braid. So we're just going to do our standard three braid challah. So as always, you're going to pinch your front ends together here. You're going to go. Remember, keep these nice and tight. You want to keep the braids as close to the top as you can and keep pushing them up. All right, and then on the other end, just take all the pieces and you shove them underneath. Same thing on this end. You just take these bits here and shove them underneath. And now, I should have probably done this on the board, but so now we have a nice challah. Just hold it up so you can see. Right? Beautiful. So now what we're going to do, we're going to cover this again. This is again to keep it nice and to stop it from drying out. Now, if your challah is a little dry, you're welcome to paint a tiny bit of oil on it. You don't have to. Your wrap from earlier should have a little bit of oil or should have a little bit of moisture on it, so that should keep it nice and moist. But the plastic will keep the moisture from leaving a little bit, and the towel will also keep it from leaving. So we're going to set an additional timer here for an hour. Now mine didn't rise as much as it usually does the first time around. So I'm actually going to give it a little longer to rise. So I'm going to give it 90 minutes to rise. And so once you've done that, you're going to wait for this to double in size. Then you're going to set your oven to 350 degrees. While you're waiting for it to warm up, you're going to take an egg or some water or some milk, just depending on your preference. And you're going to paint the top of your challah with either a spoon or a paintbrush. And when it's covered all over and your oven is ready, you're going to put it on the middle rack for 35 minutes, rotating halfway. And you'll know it's done when it's a beautiful golden brown color. And it is 205 degrees at its thickest point. Now, if you don't have a thermometer, what's the best way to know if your bread is done? So, being very careful, turning your bread over and knocking on the bottom, rapping on the bottom with your knuckles. If it sounds like it's hollow, then that means your bread is ready, okay? But this is a bread that it's hard to burn a bread like this. So if you're a little nervous, you're not really sure if it's done and you don't have the thermometer to prove it, and you've rapped on it, it kind of sounds hollow, but you're not sure, just throw it back in for a couple more minutes and try again. There's no real harm in doing that. You may dry out the bread. Another thing to keep in mind is if you have the bread in longer than you want it to be in, and you're concerned about the bread drying out, or you're concerned about the bread burning or getting too dark a color, get some foil and just place it and make a little tent on top of your bread. By the way, there's nothing wrong with a very brown challah. They're still wonderful and delicious, and sometimes you'll have that nice crust on it. That's really nice on challah. And worst case scenario, if your bread is a little drier than you want it to be, just eat it toasted. It tastes, it might taste better toasted. And then, if it gets drier than you're comfortable with, you can always make French toast with it. And this bread makes amazing French toast. All right, guys, that is it for this week. I will see you again next week for our next episode of Let's Make Bread. And have a great day, guys. Take care.